Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC America is Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Emily Ferrier, here to bring you some uplifting news stories in these trying times. The first story comes to us from the most northern part of America, this of course being Canada, with the exception of Alaska, of course. With snowstorms happening all around this time of year, one can't help but feel bleak and under the weather, so to speak. With the snow squalls and frigid air, it's easy to curl up and decide not to leave the house, much less to leave the house to help others. Not if you're a citizen of Vancouver Island. This sweet story of Canadian kindness just goes to show that every Canadian, even in Snowmageddon, is a hero. Vancouver Island was covered in a foot of snowfall earlier this week, and in response, almost 100 citizens offered up their jeeps and driving services to help nurses, doctors, and other healthcare workers get to a local hospital. The volunteers are all members of a Facebook group called the Vancouver Island Toyota 4x4, and it was for British Columbians who wanted to share their appreciation of big cars. Many of the drivers provided free transportation to hospital workers during the harsh winter storms back in 2019, so when the weather forecast called for snow this past week, the group reached out to Island Health in anticipation of shuttling the employees to work. Staffers at Victoria General Hospital have patched me up 100 times, said one of the volunteers, Shelby Newcomb. They also delivered my little boy here, and I was also born here, so it's nice to give back to them. Despite how they are providing the transportation to hospital workers for free, Newcomb said that many other community members have been donating money for gas and banana bread, which was a big hit. There's nothing that warms you up like a cup of coffee and banana bread on a really cold winter morning in Canada. Trust me, I know. Forecasts are now warning Vancouver Island residents to prepare for another foot of snowfall this week, but Newcomb and the other residents and members of the Toyota group have already prepared to give continuing rides to hospital workers until the weather subsides. That could be a while. I don't know if any of you have been to Canada in the winter, but it's not short. I will definitely tell you that. The winters seem to go on forever, and it does feel a lot of the time like you might get stuck somewhere. And I gotta say, it's pretty disheartening sometimes, and you don't want to go to work, and you just want to sit at home and read and forget about everything else. But it's really nice to hear these stories about people that are going out and doing their best to make sure that the most important people are getting to their work. And I do think that that tends to be the hospital workers. You know, that's a life or death situation. That's a life or death job. And it's often life or death taking out to the roads in Canada, especially during these like huge winter storms. So it's pretty incredible that these guys are doing that. There's nothing more incredible to me than to give up your warmth and transportation during a storm, but these stories prove that there are some incredibly selfless people in the North, and I, for one, am glad to see it. When we come back, some more snow-related news, but this time from the United States. That's when we return. In 2008, the U.S. national debt was $10 trillion. Today, it's over $23 trillion, and it's rising like a hockey stick. If you don't think that we're sitting on a house of cards, you're living with your head in the sand. But since you're listening to my podcast, you're clearly smarter than the average American. So, what's your plan? Can you afford another hit to your retirement, like the last downturn when the S&P dropped 50%? Look back historically. When the bottom falls out of everything else, gold tends to safeguard savings. And right now, thanks to a little-known IRS tax law, you can even move your IRA or eligible 401k to an IRA backed by physical gold and silver. It's perfect for those who want to protect their hard-earned retirement savings from any future geopolitical uncertainty. Birch Gold Group has thousands of satisfied customers, countless 5-star reviews, and an A+ rating with BBB. Contact Birch Gold to request free info kits on physical precious metals. See if diversifying into gold and silver makes sense for you.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we talked about the generosity of Vancouver citizens, and now, just a little further north to the state of Alaska. In the Alaskan wilderness, a 30-year-old man was left stranded in the snow for 3 weeks following the tragic burning down of his cabin. There's nothing worse than losing your home and all of your possessions, unless it leaves you in the cold dead of winter afterwards. Tyson Steele had been living alone for several months in this small house in a town located 70 miles northwest of Anchorage. He'd been burning a fire in his wood stove back in December when a piece of flaming cardboard flew up his fireplace chimney and landed on his roof, which started a slow fire that eventually left the cabin in ruins. Wood stoves are pretty common in the north. They're quite common in Canada as well. Just such a beautiful, sweet way to warm your home. And it's just so heartbreaking that something that could keep you warm and keep you safe could also be the end of your cabin. But don't worry, this is going to turn out to be a good story. The population of his town had only about 35 people, so you can't really call it a town, can you? The nearest neighbor lived about 20 miles away. With no means of communication or call to help, Steele endured sub-zero temperatures in brutal weather conditions, wearing long johns, boots with no socks, and a heavy wool sweater. When his family and friends hadn't heard from Steele for several weeks, they requested a welfare check from Alaska State Troopers. As a helicopter flew over the area, they caught sight of Steele waving his arms in the air next to a massive SOS sign that he'd stamped into the snow. That must have taken him ages to make it big enough so that the rescue copters could see him. I can't imagine having the wherewithal to do that when I was freezing and had just lost everything. It's actually quite incredible, people's will to live. Steele had collectively spent 20 days in the cold before his rescue. 20 days. 20. That's nearly a month that he spent in the Alaskan cold, in the dead of winter, with nothing but long johns, no socks, and boots. After he was requested, he reportedly requested 2 things: a shower and a number 2 McDonald's breakfast meal. I totally get that. Every time I'm freezing, I'm so hungry. I don't know about you guys. Let me know in the comments. Now that he's in relatively good health, Steele plans on regrouping with his family in Salt Lake City before returning to his beloved home state of Alaska. I, for one, would be looking into some fireproofing next time around. But that's not the only incredible rescue that we found. Call it a Christmas miracle or sheer luck, but this 28-year-old man is grateful to be alive after he managed to survive inside his partially submerged car for 5 hours. Emergency rescuers from the California Highway Patrol received a dispatch early one morning in regards to an overturned car in the river. The car was on its roof with its hazards on, and the interior of the car was nearly completely submerged. However, the rescue workers managed to get the car out of the river by about 8 a.m., and they were stunned to see the driver inside was still alive. So, according to the Facebook page, Michael Finn, the highway patroller, the man who was rescued, had been driving about 3 a.m., so that's 5 hours prior to his rescue. He went off the road, and he managed to survive thanks to a pocket of air, just a small pocket of air that allowed him to breathe. The Highway Patrol didn't actually disclose any further details about the incident, but they managed to transport him to the medical center nearby, where he was treated for the exposure to the cold waters. So not only was he there with very little air, just a small pocket of air, but these waters were very cold. Like, keep in mind, yes, it's California, but it is winter. That can't have been pleasant. So the little message that the Highway Patrol had was just for everybody to slow down during the dark, icy hours of the morning. So there's 2 stories of human survival, but as well as the hard-working efforts of rescue teams that make sure that everyone makes it home safe. When we return, we're going to talk about a dementia patient whose EP is now climbing the charts. That's when we return.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. When we left off, we talked about rescuing citizens from the snow and from the water. And now we're going to get out of the cold and into some smooth songs. We're going to talk about Margaret Mackey. An 83-year-old woman with dementia is quickly climbing the music charts after her nursing home caregiver fell in love with her singing voice. Because of her dementia, Margaret has trouble remembering things from day to day, but one thing she does remember is all the words to Frank Sinatra's 1969 ballad, My Way. After Mackie and her caregiver, Jamie Lee Morley, sang a duet of the song at their Christmas party last month, the staffers were just in awe of her talent. This story reminded me of Oliver Sacks' book, Musicophilia. If you haven't heard of it, he's a neurologist and writer, and I love his works, and I think everybody should take a look at them. But he talks about the importance of music in dementia care. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that throughout this article. So in his book, he says, musical perception, musical sensibility, musical emotion, and musical memory can survive long after forms of other memory have disappeared. Back to the story, back to Margaret. Her family and friends were there in the audience to witness this moment, and what a moment it was. For her to get up on stage at her age would have taken so much courage, and fight and sing so beautifully, it absolutely blew my mind. It's a moment I'll never forget, said Morley, her caregiver, who bonded with Mackie over their shared love of music before. And he ended up getting her to record the song. Back to Sacks. The medical facts about music therapy as an ideal intervention for patients suffering from Alzheimer's disease and dementia are unparalleled. Sacks describes his visits to patients in various old age homes. Some of them are confused. Some of them are agitated, some lethargic, and some have almost lost language. But all of them, without exception, respond to music. Since uploading their rendition of My Way to iTunes, it's steadily climbed to number 8 in the top 40 most popular music chart, surpassing Ed Sheeran, Selena Gomez, Lizzo, and Miley Cyrus. Additionally, they did receive some funds for the song from the downloads, but instead of keeping it, Morley and Mackie are donating all of the song's proceeds to the Alzheimer's Society. Morley said of the song's success, the feeling of getting so much awareness out there and connecting everyone through the power of music is exactly why we recorded the song as a single. Margaret's family and me couldn't be happier with how the public responded to it. Back to Oliver Sacks. Music imprints itself on the brain deeper than any other human experience, evoking emotions in ways that nothing else can. When we return, another story of a senior citizen breaking the headlines.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Back from our break. Before we left off, we talked about Margaret Mackey, a dementia patient, using her talent for song to rise the top 40 charts and raise money for dementia. Now, we're going to talk about 75-year-old Linda Herring from Johnson County, Iowa, who's tirelessly providing food, clothing, love, and medical care to hundreds of foster kids since the 1970s. She's cared for 600 children over the course of 5 decades. When Herring first began fostering kids, she was also running a home daycare and working as a night custodian in a local high school, as well as volunteering as a first responder for 50 years of her life. This woman is unstoppable. She can't stop but give back to society. She can't help but do anything she can to make sure that America is a better place. Out of the hundreds of foster kids that Herring has taken under her wing, many of them experienced a range of medical conditions and special needs, none of which deterred Herring. Linda mostly fostered young children and children with special medical needs and kept bins of clothes in her garage, stacked to the ceiling, labeled by size and gender, read a statement from the Johnson County officials. No one ever had to worry about a child going without clothes at Linda's, even if they arrived with nothing but what they were wearing. Anthony Herring, who was just 3 years old when he was adopted into the Iowa family, described his mother to CNN. It's hard to say in words her impact. She was always available and ready for a child in need. These kids were usually taken from traumatic situations, and she'd take them in, provide a warm bed, clean clothes, warm meals, and love. She also worked hard to keep the families together, keeping siblings together, helping biological parents make the changes needed to be able to care for their children. That's above and beyond, in my opinion. Not only is she helping these children, but she's helping whole families come back together. She always made sure a new child in her home was given the professional photograph that was placed on the wall in the living room. It seems like a small thing, but it really helps them feel like they're at home. Miss Herring announced in her retirement from fostering new children in October due to health concerns, which the Johnson County Board of Supervisors honored her with a special ceremony of appreciation. Additionally, 5 of Herring's biological children and 3 of her grandchildren have been carrying on her legacy as foster parents as well. This is why I love this story so much. I was quite shocked to find out that she did have biological children, but I guess I shouldn't have been shocked by that. You don't simply foster or adopt children just because either you can't simply have kids yourself or because that's the way that you choose to have your family, but having your own kids may also incite you to want to help others. And not only did she help all of these people, but now more people that she helped and she raised are going to be carrying on her legacy. I think Herring is a phenomenal person, and I think I've learned a little something from her, and I hope you have too. When we come back, some positive news in this seemingly apocalyptic time in Australia.
Pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets podcast is for you.
Before the break, we talked about the generosity of foster mom Linda. But now, we switch to a little bit of a tougher subject. As we know, the bushfires in Australia have been a devastation we can hardly imagine. But the world seems to be coming together to try their best to save the country's wildlife and plants and homes. And that includes American tennis legend Serena Williams. 3 years following the last victory of Serena Williams, the legend herself, she earned the title victory earlier this week. As she stood victorious, she announced that she'd be donating all of her prize money to the Australian bushfire relief efforts. Williams won the ASB Classic match against American tennis player Jessica Puglia in Auckland, New Zealand, in a 6-3, 6-4 match. This is Williams' first championship since the birth of her daughter in 2017, and it came with a $43,000 prize, all of which she'll be donating to the Australian organizations fighting the bushfires across the southern provinces. I've been playing in Australia for over 20 years, and it's been really hard for me to watch all the news and everything that's been happening in Australia with the fires, Williams told reporters. So I decided that I would donate my prize money for this great cause. Williams is no stranger to victory. In fact, in her 38 years, she's claimed 73 career titles. She'll now reportedly be heading to the Australian Opener, where she previously won 7 of her 23 Grand Slam titles. Williams is joined by many other celebrities, pouring in the donations to Australian relief centres, an online fundraiser created by an Australian comedian, Celeste Barber, has raised over $35 million in 2 weeks alone. Donations have also poured in from the likes of Pink, Chris Hemsworth, Nicole Kidman, Elton John, Lizzo, and Kylie Jenner. But that's not all the good news coming out of the bushfire tragedies. Back in 2018, when wildfires were raging through California, 138 firefighters from Australia and New Zealand quickly came to our aid, flying over to save our state. The Australian and New Zealand personnel filed critical needs during the peak of the Western fire season for mid-level fire line management, heavy equipment, helicopter operations, and structure protection, said the National Park Service. So now, the U.S. is repaying the favor. For the first time since 2010, 100 American firefighters have been deployed to help with emergency response crews in Australia. Several dozen more volunteer firefighters will be deployed this week, according to the LA Times. We're sending a contingent from several federal agencies that reflect decades of fire management experience. We face many of the same firefighting challenges in each country. We've utilized their expertise in the past, and we welcome the opportunity to reciprocate. And just one more piece of positive news in this terrible ongoing tragedy. Conservationists have actually managed to save the world's last remaining quote-unquote dinosaur trees from the Australian bushfires. Fossil records show that this small grouping of prehistoric trees existed as far back as 200 million years ago. And since these 200 trees are the only known of the Wollemi pines in the world, their location has remained a closely kept secret to ensure their protection. When Australian legislators heard that the bushfires had been raging across New South Wales since September, and they were edging closer to the Wollemi Grove, some specialized firefighters were airlifted into the scene. These pines outlived the dinosaurs, so when we saw the fire approaching, we realized we had to do everything that we could to save them, said Environmental Minister Matt Keane. Just a week before the fires hit the surrounding forests, the firefighters sprayed the trees with a fire retardant system and installed an irrigation system to keep the area moist. As the fire drew closer, air tankers dumped water around the perimeter of the grove and kept the flames at bay. This is such a remarkable species in terms of ecology and evolution, and it's only found in Australia. It's like the opera house of the natural world, he said. Losing it would have added to the catastrophe we've seen elsewhere. These stories have given me hope amongst this nightmare, and I hope they do the same for you. When we come back, a bit of a quick fire round of some of the positive news stories that I've enjoyed the past few days. When we return.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we heard a little bit of positive news out of the horrible things going on in Australia. But now, I think it's time for a quick fire round of my favorite good news stories of the past few days. Number 1. The San Francisco Giants announced that they've hired Alyssa Nakken, officially making her the first female coach in Major League Baseball history. This is a big one for me. I love when really talented women get recognized for their talent and get to do a job that was historically only seen as a man's job. Nakken, a 3-time academic All-American softball player in the Sacramento State, was first hired by the Giants as an intern in 2014 and has since worked her way all the way to the top. Before the promotion, she was responsible for leading a number of the team's health and wellness events. Last month, she was nominated by her peers and co-awarded the 2019 Sprinkles of Love Award, a Giants honor for her ethics, professionalism, and humanitarianism. But on Thursday, she was named assistant coach under the Giants manager, Gabe Kapler. In every new organization, environment affects performance, and baseball clubhouses are no different, Kapler said. That's why in addition to assisting with the rest of the coaching staff in the field, Mark and Alyssa will focus on fostering a clubhouse culture that promotes high performance through other attributes, such as a deep sense of collaboration and team. Number 2. Stolen therapy goat found, reunited with depressed cow. This is about a pet therapy goat that was stolen from his home in New Zealand, but now he's safely back home. Peaches the goat formed a friendship with a depressed cow after the cow was left lonely following the death of a fellow cow a few months prior. His hotel caretaker, Joe Robin, said Peaches was introduced to the cow in an effort to lift the cow's spirits. The cow's called Bunter, by the way. After Rosie passed away, Bunter got really depressed, and we heard that goats were good therapy, and there was a lady that was willing to give Peaches to us. As soon as Peaches arrived in the paddock, Bunter was a different cow, running around everywhere. He also started eating again after the arrival of the goat, and the happy friendship was a bit short-lived after Peaches was stolen. The police did some investigating and then found Peaches at a nearby property. As a result, Peaches was located and returned home to Bunter's delight. Bunter the cow was upset at the intrusion, but is understood to hold no beef, was the response. So now that they're reunited, I think they're going to make sure that Peaches doesn't disappear again, including They reinforced an electric fence around the paddock. Number 3. A mechanic creates a prosthetic for a 9-year-old so that she can play violin like the rest of her class. I love this story. Valerie Romero, a 4th grader at St. John's Middle School in Arizona, was born with one hand, so had a bit of trouble playing the violin like everyone else in her class. Recently, Nate Kelligg's children came home and told him about Romero and how she needed help holding her violin and bow at the same time. During the class, she could only practice fingering the notes, but couldn't play along like everyone else. Kelligg, a mechanic, knew how to find a way to help. He began to look at various tools of work, and he asked coworkers to help with the project. I got to talking to the guys at work, and there was an instrument holder that would work perfectly. It was already made, so it was something you could buy online. The next step was creating the prosthetics based around the instrument holder. He did some research online and figured out what to do. But I didn't have the tools to do what prosthetic makers do, so I did the next best thing. When I was in the military, there was a stuff called thermoplastic, and I would mold it to her arm. Thermoplastic is a type of plastic material that becomes flexible and moldable in hot water and hardens to shape as it cools. As Romero grows, the prosthetic will need to be updated, but for now, it's working perfectly. She's excelled at playing the violin, and she even played along at the holiday concert. I think it's just amazing, Romero's orchestra teacher said. For this little girl, it's really something. Number 4. An Uber driver earns his college degree after a passenger pays off her debt. An Uber driver is one step closer to achieving her dream of becoming a lawyer thanks to a passenger who paid off her college debt. Latonia Young said she picked up Kevin Ish outside of Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. During the ride, they got talking. A hairstylist by day and an Uber driver by night, she told Ish that when she was 16, she had to drop out of high school to raise her first child. And more recently, she'd drop out of college because of a $700 balance that she couldn't afford to pay off. Every time I got ready to pay the money, my kids needed something. So I said, okay, I'll just wait. A few days later, Young received a phone call from the school, and the message stated, "You can register for classes now." I was blown away. A stranger had never done that or anything like that for me. When the balance was paid by Ish, Young earned her associate's degree in criminal justice. They kept in touch. That really helps us out. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much, and have an amazing rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from social media news to marketing news, and even weird news, the GSMC Podcast Network has you covered. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast.